Welcome to the Gilded Heiresses. I'm Julie Montague, Countess of Sandwich and Gilded Age historian. And in today's episode, we're setting sail, not just across the Atlantic, but across a world of glittering destinations, gilded traditions, and social choreography. While much has been made of the American heiresses who married into British aristocracy, their journeys didn't begin and end in the drawing rooms of Belgravia or the great halls of Blenheim Palace. They were shaped by the places they traveled to, the cities, spas, resorts, and castles where society moved, mingled, and made its marriages. This was an age of curated itineraries and calculated appearances, when travel was both performance and power play. And for the aristocracy, British or newly assimilated American, it was essential. Today, we're looking at the destinations that defined aristocratic life at the turn of the century. Where did these families go? What did they do there? And how did the act of travel itself shape their identities? Let's begin. For those making their way from New York to London, the journey was as important as the destination. Transatlantic liners like the RMS Umbria, Lusitania, and Britannic offered first-class cabins that mimicked luxury hotels, complete with velvet dining salons, music rooms, and daily social itineraries. It was, in many ways, an extended debutante ball at sea. Passengers dressed for dinner. They formed temporary courtships. Friendships were forged over shuffled cards and piano recitals, while staff ensured the silver was polished and the champagne perfectly chilled. For heiresses and aristocrats alike, these crossings were more than logistical. They were theatrical. A well-made impression on the voyage could secure invitations in London or marriages in Mayfair. Upon arrival at Southampton or Liverpool, travelers would take trains, some even private ones, into the heart of England, where carriages waited to deliver them to townhouses or country estates. And once they arrived, the season was on. London, during the social season, late spring to early summer, was a theater of elite society. Families rented or refurbished homes in Mayfair or Belgravia, often at great cost. These neighborhoods were chosen not for aesthetics alone, but for the proximity to Buckingham Palace, Hyde Park, and the opera. The rhythms of aristocratic life were precise. Afternoons were for calls and garden parties. Evenings were for theater and dinners, and late nights were for dances and balls. The season wasn't just a social whirl, it was a carefully constructed courtship ritual, particularly for American heiresses looking to marry titles. Their presence added new energy to the scene, and their wealth helped sustain it. Shopping excursions to Bond Street, fitting at Worth of Paris via London ateliers, and strolls in Green Park offered visibility and opportunity. Appearances were currency, and London was the bank. If you're a fan of shows such as Bridgerton, then you'll have seen a glimpse of the social happenings in and around London during the season. Young women were at all times on display, and so they must always look the perfect part. But even the season came to an end, and when it did, the elite did what they always did. They moved on. When London grew stifling, aristocratic families retreated to the countryside. Stately homes in counties like Hampshire, Gloucestershire, or Yorkshire hosted weekend gatherings that were equal parts leisure and political networking. Invitations to these house parties were coveted. They promised long breakfasts, carriage rides, informal dances, and crucially, discretion. Fox hunts in autumn and shooting weekends in winter provided opportunities for sport, flirtation, and alliance building. The countryside was also where American wives often learned the full weight of their new roles, managing households, entertaining guests, and overseeing land. But not all countryside escapes were confined to Britain. Some headed abroad, seeking both pleasure and prestige. By the late 19th century, the European continent had become a well-trodden path for the British aristocracy. And while the destinations were diverse, they shared a common thread. They served as stages for display, refinement, and reinvention. The French Riviera was perhaps the most dazzling of all. Once a sleepy coastal region, it was transformed by the arrival of Europe's elite. Towns like Nice, Cannes, and Monte Carlo became winter havens. Their palm-lined boulevards and grand hotels, a glamorous contrast to England's damp grays. The Riviera season ran from December to March, offering a second social calendar to those who had tired of London's fog. Elegant villas were let for the season. Ballrooms overlooked the Mediterranean. And casino nights at Monte Carlo weren't just about the roulette table. Their main function was as a venue in which to be seen. Women wore pastel silks and carried parasols edged in lace. Men dressed in dinner jackets even under the stars. It was light, extravagant, and flirtatious, which was quite the antidote to British restraint. Further inland, Florence and Rome drew a more reflective crowd. For aristocratic families, especially those with daughters entering the marriage market, Italy was a cultural finishing school. Days were spent among Botticellis and Michelangelos, with private tutors offering lectures on classical sculpture and Renaissance history. Evenings meant dinners hosted by expatriate circles or local nobility, bridging cultures through art, conversation, and the occasional aria. Rome's Piazza di Spagna bustled with English voices, while Florence's Via Tornabuoni saw American heiresses fitted for custom shoes and embroidered gloves. The Uffizi Gallery, Villa Borghese, and Roman Forum weren't just historical sites. They were classrooms, backdrops for portraits, and sometimes even spots for secret rendezvous. Elsewhere, Paris remained the epicenter of fashion and flirtation. Fittings at the House of Worth were de rigueur for any respectable heiress, and a single season in the French capital could define one's entire wardrobe. But Paris was also political. It was a place where women could attend salons, theater, and philosophical lectures, and emerged not just stylish, but sharpened. Even Switzerland, with its reputation for cool air and cooler reserve, drew the elite. Towns like Lucerne, St. Moritz, and Davos became enclaves of wealth in the mountains, where English voices echoed across the Alps and winter sports were played in tweed and pearls. In the summer months, They took the waters at spas like Baden-Baden or Vichy, sipping mineral cures by day and attending masked balls by night. In every city, there was a ritual, a hotel, a milliner, a bookshop, a photographer. These destinations weren't holidays. They were chapters in a curated life, part itinerary, part identity. For the most ambitious or imperially connected families, travel extended far beyond Europe. The British Empire's reach meant that aristocracy was no longer a purely domestic affair. It was global. And to travel through the empire was, in some circles, to lay claim to the fullness of aristocratic experience. India was the crown jewel, both politically and socially. For those with family ties to the military, the East India Company, or colonial administration, India became not just a destination, but a proving ground. The climate was harsh, the expectations high, but the rewards, both social and financial, were considerable. Cities like Calcutta, Bombay, and Delhi hosted grand durbars, tiger hunts, and garden parties that rivaled anything in London or Paris. Viceregal wives were expected to display British values while engaging in soft diplomacy. Their homes were adorned with silks, marble, and silver. Their carriages, staffed with liveried drivers, their appearances chronicled in both the Times of India and the Tatler. But life in India was also difficult, particularly for women. Many suffered from tropical illness, isolation, and the pressure to balance imperial image with genuine cultural sensitivity. It was something that few achieved. Yet despite this, India remained a coveted chapter in the social calendar, a place where one could display one's endurance, taste, and adaptability on an imperial scale. Further west, Egypt became a fashionable escape from the European winter. Cruises along the Nile offered not only warm air and golden light, but a curated sense of adventure. Passengers floated past the pyramids, Karnak, and the Valley of the Kings, all from the comfort of steamships equipped with French chefs and drawing rooms. Hotels like Shepheard's in Cairo were legendary, part diplomatic salon, part theater. Afternoon tea might include an archaeologist, a duchess, and an American heiress draped in ivory linen and reading Baedeker's Guide. The growing popularity of Egyptology added intellectual flair to the season, and aristocratic tourists brought home not just memories, but antiquities, some legal, others less so. Other travelers ventured to Tangier, Constantinople, or even Jerusalem. Their journeys filled with Orientalist fascination and colonial detachment. Their journeys filled with Orientalist fascination and colonial detachment. These trips were often recorded in travel diaries, illustrated with watercolors, or featured in society columns with descriptions of kaftans, camels, and lantern-lit dinners under desert skies. It must be said, much of this travel was steeped in privilege and colonial entitlement. The aristocracy's presence in these regions was rarely apolitical, but it was formative. It shaped how they saw themselves, which was as global citizens, empire builders, and cultural arbiters. Travel was not just a pleasure, it was proof. Proof that they belonged to a world without borders, so long as the world recognized theirs. For the aristocracy of the Gilded Age, travel wasn't only escape. It was an identity. It was in the saloons of steamships, the parlors of Paris, the hunting fields of Yorkshire, and the marble halls of Florence that women became who they were expected to be: poised, educated, elegant, and worldly. They were travelers, yes, but they were also diplomats, curators, hostesses, and strategists. Every journey had a purpose, every destination a performance. And yet, despite the glamour and luxury, there was often tension between movement and belonging, between performance and authenticity, between being seen and being known. But one thing is certain: without the ships, the trains, the carriages, and the maps, there would be no Gilded Heiresses as we know them. Thank you for joining me on the Gilded Heiresses. I'm Julie Montague, Countess of Sandwich. Until next time.